Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, January 19th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about the Donald Trump veepstakes. After Donald Trump's impressive Iowa caucus victory, it has become increasingly clear that there is no mathematical pathway forward for anybody besides him to the Republican nomination in this election year. Now, of course, there are candidates still in the race, Governor Ron DeSantis and Ambassador Nikki Haley, who promise and pledge to their voters and the media that they are very much still in the race. However, the results seem to suggest otherwise, with Donald Trump clinching a majority of the vote in a 7-way caucus in the state of Iowa, on track for trouncing victories in the upcoming states of New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada, and so on and so forth. And with this wide expectation that Donald Trump will be in fact the nominee by early March by simple delegate count, we have already started discussing who his vice president will be. And with that, Axios has released an article just yesterday discussing this real possibility about who actually would be chosen and tapped to be Donald Trump's running mate. This comes following a collection of people on the inside, close to the Trump campaign, on the Trump campaign, advisors to the campaign, whoever it might be. These people have put out statements both publicly and anonymously that have contributed to this shortlist, as Axios reports. Ones that is rooted in a very much certainty around who his potential VP will be. And thus, we will be going through it. And so in this veepstakes, a very, very important one, I think this will be very important for the general election. The selection of the vice president is often seen as something that isn't regarded as a make or break for a campaign. But in the case of Donald Trump in a rematch against Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, I genuinely think this vice presidential pick will be of the utmost importance, if not the most important, in decades for a top-tier contender. Because Donald Trump, again, is facing up against the same exact candidates as who he faced just 4 years ago, there is a very strong possibility that whoever he chooses as VP could very much change the outcome of the election, both to the benefit or detriment of him at the top of the ticket. Now, the initial veepstakes list, as you can see on your screen, comes in very strong with just a display of Nikki Haley, J.D. Vance, and Elise Stefanik. These are the names that you often see discussed as the potential vice presidents for Donald Trump, and honestly, for good reason. We are going to be going through this list, but also discussing Governor Kristi Noem, who actually doesn't make the short list according to Axios, but we know from the sources on the inside and those who have leaked it to the press that Kristi Noem very much is within the realm of possibility to be chosen as VP, even dating all the way back to September, when Kristi Noem became front and center in the veepstakes, when he held a rally even floating up the possibility of a name like Trump Noem 2024 on the billboard when she endorsed him in South Dakota. But that's besides the point. We'll get to her a little bit later. Let's go ahead and start off with the general takeaways that this article wants us to have from it, and what it could mean for 2024. And so they are saying here that the stakes are far higher than 2016, and I honestly agree. Mike Pence is viewed as a traitor, and beyond that point, Mike Pence was a boring pick back in 2016, but he was somebody who balanced Donald Trump's overexerted enthusiasm towards the race that turned into things like gaffes and scandals and campaign inefficiencies that they needed somebody on this end, on the VP end, who could be presented as more presidential. And that's exactly what Mike Pence was. But then after Donald Trump won in 2016, it reaffirmed to the Republican Party that Donald Trump himself simply was not the problem. Mike Pence was not the one bringing over voters to the middle ground. Donald Trump himself did that, as outlandish as he may be. And they continued with this strategy into 2018, eventually into 2020, where they lost and realized that maybe Donald Trump's stick was a one-time fluke rather than a consistent strategy that they should adopt. They reverted back on that initial statement, saying we'll try it in 2022. The RNC, the NRSC, and the NRCC will refuse to endorse in primary races and refuse to meddle, whereas Donald Trump said, I will be the meddler, the main one, right? And so Donald Trump had heavy influence on who was running in 2022. Almost all his presumptive nominees or endorsed nominees ended up losing the general election and competitive races, and thus called into question Does Donald Trump need to run at the top of the ticket? What does his style of candidacy work? And so we're back in that 2020 phase, the midpoint between 2020 and 2022, where they're saying, initially Donald Trump was not the right person for this. But then the voters reverted back and said, you know what, maybe he is. Except this time, you no longer see this idea of balancing Donald Trump at this ticket. The only person on this list that I think would even balance him in any way is Nikki Haley. And we are seeing now in new reports that is becoming increasingly less and less likely nationwide. But the point is, Donald Trump, I think, above all, is looking for loyalty. He is looking for someone who either served in his administration, who endorsed him early on in 2016, or who endorsed him early on in this election cycle, who has proven themselves from 2016 onward. And I think that's where you get this list coming into full effect. You have Elise Stefanik, who ranks at the number 1 on the veepstakes list here, who currently serves as the chair of the House GOP conference. You know who used to hold that position? You had Representative Liz Cheney. But this was a very contentious vote because Liz Cheney wasn't initially removed from her position. It was a vote that in private ballot did not remove her. But as she gotten more and more outspoken against President Trump, not only did she earn herself being kicked out of House GOP conference chair, but instead lost her primary challenge to now the incumbent Wyoming representative. And so Liz Cheney being removed and Elise Stefanik replacing her, Elise Stefanik completely changed her tune. And she had, leading after the 2020 election, she became very associated with Donald Trump, but even followed through to a point where she doubled down on the January 6th insurrection and said that Donald Trump was not at fault, and that what happened on that day was not something that would compel her to certify the election results, that she still believed that the election was unfairly turned over, or unfairly stolen by Joe Biden. And so Elise Stefanik has been playing this Trump loyalty game for quite some time. I think she even ranks as number 1 or number 2 on my own veepstakes list just because she has proven herself time and time again to Donald Trump, especially now with recent attention on her following the congressional hearings around anti-Semitism around college campuses. And so Elise Stefanik, I think, has really garnered a lot of positive attention on the potential veepstakes list, even to a point where now you are seeing that NBC News just 3 days ago, reporting that Donald Trump is eyeing her as the number 1 on the veepstakes list, which is why I think she ranks number 1 on Axios, but we'll talk about her a little bit later. JD Vance came into a bit of a surprise seeing him on this short list. I'm not really thrilled, I think, at the possibility of JD Vance being the nominee as someone who would look at this from an analytical lens. I think Elise Stefanik provides more electability than JD Vance does. He underperformed Donald Trump in the state of Ohio, and that isn't to say that Trump in any way would lose Ohio with JD Vance on the ticket. I just don't think it helps him really anywhere. JD Vance is a freshman senator. He isn't somebody who comes into this with high name recognition. And while Donald Trump may be looking for that because JD Vance is loyal without the high name recognition, I don't think it adds enough of a change from 2016 that allows him to win the election. I think the problem here for Donald Trump also wasn't Mike Pence, but he needs somebody who is a benefit because Donald Trump himself is a liability for this upcoming election. He needs that level of electability that, quite frankly, I really only see in somebody like our third person on this list, Nikki Haley. And while Nikki Haley has been insistent, tweeted out months ago that she doesn't play for second, has been reaffirming to the media even today saying that vice president is off the table. I don't want to be anybody's vice president. Going further and further into her attacks. And honestly, this makes sense, right? If you are running for president, you would never admit that you would be fine doing second in command if you're running to be first in command. And so I think Nikki Haley running for president in the Republican Party has really made her an enemy of Donald Trump and has forced her to say, vice president is off the table. I don't want it. I'm not going to be Trump's VP. He's not the right guy. And when pressed out about it at debates, on the campaign trail, whatever it is, she has consistently gone after Donald Trump in an effort to win over some of his voters. And while it might have worked in the state of New Hampshire, as we are seeing in polling data that is showing a tightening of the race, he still comes out ahead, is still expected to win the state of New Hampshire, and is now starting to attack Nikki Haley quite substantially. Even yesterday on Truth Social, coming out against her for the past few months, calling her bird brain, going out against her, referring to her as disloyal. Donald Trump values loyalty. I think the only real reason why we could see Nikki Haley chosen as VP is exactly what you're seeing described here in Axios, a unity ticket. She represents the non-Trump wing of the Republican Party. He obviously represents the Trump wing of the Republican Party. The problem here is that when you tally up the votes nationwide, Donald Trump gets around 70% of support now that everybody else has dropped out, besides DeSantis and Haley. They are splitting the remainder 30% that does not want Donald Trump to be the next president, and so Nikki Haley would be seen as someone who grabs in that 30%, but it is up to Trump if he thinks that he needs the 30%. Because in 2016, when he won the presidential election, you'd be surprised to know that Donald Trump only won 44% of primary support by the end of it. And that's with all the votes being tabulated in numerous primary and caucus states where there were no other candidates besides Donald Trump. And so when you see that, and when you see that the majority of the party in fact voted for somebody else, and now there is this very, very loyal base around him of 70%, you begin to see why a unity ticket might not fly in the eyes of Donald Trump, especially if the supposed unity ticket candidate is saying, it's off the table, I don't want to be Donald Trump's VP. But like I said earlier on in this video, I wanted to take a bit of time to talk to you about Kristi Noem. Kristi Noem is a Republican who has been very involved in the Trump campaign for quite some time now, and very involved in supporting Donald Trump across a number of states, especially in the state of Iowa, which borders the state of South Dakota. And so, or not directly, but close enough. And so Kristi Noem has been very insistent on being involved with Donald Trump and his political endeavors. I think she very much has been gunning for this VP spot since the moment that Mike Pence became a traitor in the eyes of Donald Trump. Kristi Noem also is extremely popular amongst the Republican base. She has been floated as a potential 2024 candidate herself, has been on and off conservative media for years now, and has garnered a very positive reputation. I think if I was to call the shot today, I would remove Nikki Haley from my list. I don't think it's going to be J.D. Vance. I would say my number one choice here right now would be Elise Stefanik, and my number two would be Kristi Noem. In terms of who would provide most of electability to the ticket, I don't know if any of them really provide as much as Nikki Haley. I will say, though, Nikki Haley has a little bit of a shaky electability history, though, when she actually gets on the ballot, as we saw in the 2014 race in South Carolina. But time certainly has changed, because she is much more popular on the national than a lot of people give her credit for. But if I was to call it between the two, I think Elise Stefanik provides more, being a representative from New York who has less baggage than Kristi Noem does. But Kristi Noem is adored by the Republican Party. And so I think Donald Trump, in many ways, is looking for someone who would be able to add to his ticket. And quite frankly, I think both of them do. I don't think that Kristi Noem is as strong as Elise Stefanik, but I do think these would be strong electable choices for his vice presidential spot. I also think now that we are seeing a lot of articles populate specifically about the veepstakes around Nikki Haley, around Kristi Noem, around Elise Stefanik, these things don't just happen by coincidence. This isn't just the media picking up chatter on the ground. A lot of this is planted by campaigns that are doing early vets to see reactions to potential choices. For example, when Nikki Haley was first, in this possibility in the running for vice president, this was a December 22nd, 2023 article about Trump asking allies about the possibility of Nikki Haley for vice president. When this article broke, you saw Donald Trump on conservative radio being questioned by the host saying, you've come out against Nikki Haley. Would you actually consider her for VP? He says, it's not entirely off the table. I'm open to anything. We've always gotten along together. We've always worked well together. But then came an insane reaction from the right wing. Even Donald Trump Jr. tweeting out himself that if Nikki Haley was chosen as VP, Donald Trump Jr. would get his father to drop her from the ticket, that she would be a complete nightmare for the Republican Party, a nightmare for the Make America Great Again wing. And so Nikki Haley sort of fell out of consideration, but I don't believe for a second that Donald Trump wasn't testing the waters. I remember back in 2016 that when we were seeing who could it be for Hillary Clinton in 2016, there was so much speculation around Senator Tim Kaine, so much buzz, so much discussion, right? So much overall influence from outside factors. Articles back in April saying, what about Tim Kaine? And looking at the public response, which was barely anything. Looking at the Democratic internal response, which was largely positive, right? These fielded articles out here, and not to say the journalists are in any way in collusion with the campaign, but tidbits get leaked for a reason, right? Donald Trump has surrounded himself with some of the most loyal people following the 2020 election in almost every way possible. And so to see an article like this populate, I don't think it happens without reason. I think Donald Trump or somebody on his campaign is looking to see as the more press centers around people like Nikki Haley, like Kristi Noem, like Elise Stefanik, it only builds out more of the opposition research that we could start to see coming in, what people would already start to use and levy as attacks against them, helps see how the base responds to choices like this. And right now, it's very positive for Kristi Noem and Elise Stefanik, but not so positive for Nikki Haley, which is the exact reason why I think things like this start to release. And as we look ahead to the 2024 election, Donald Trump needs to take into account electability above all else. Loyalty is one thing. If I was a political advisor, I would get Nikki Haley on board, but I don't think that's going to happen. And now, given the options that he has, based on who has come out publicly and said, I don't want VP, I don't want to be in that consideration, I'm not in the running for that, I think it is boiling down to between Kristi Noem and Elise Stefanik, and I think if he was to call the shot today, it would be Elise Stefanik. But Kristi Noem comes in at a very, very close second in terms of electability, in terms of how she adds to the ticket, and just dynamics between her and Trump. Both of these two have worked very well with him in the past, have proven their loyalty time and time again, and I will be interested to see who Donald Trump actually chooses. Because according to Fox News, Donald Trump has already chosen who his nominee is going to be, and he simply just can't tell us. And so I think it's very interesting that we are now maneuvering under this large idea here that Donald Trump has already chosen his nominee, that he has already chosen his VP, which is also why I think it's not going to be Nikki Haley. But I'm interested to see how it changes the election, if it does at all, and what it means for the future in 2028, 2032, so on and so forth, about the future of the Republican Party. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 Republican primary election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.